Welcome to this exclusive news series. The Revival Project is becoming one of the fastest growing campaigns for unity between Jews in the diaspora and Israel.
Thank you for the great response we got from our first podcast. The subject was whether there's a need to strengthen bonds between Jews in the diaspora and Israel. We explored the simple concept that anyone can stand next to a stranger and talk about the weather, when the next bus is coming, or some other bland subject that shouldn't really result in conflict. Although with passions riding high about global climate, rising fuel prices that can impact public transport, and much else related to other world events, it's really anyone's guess what can be a safe subject for idle talk today. But hey, let's have some hope for the more mundane aspects of social intercourse. It looks like it's going to rain, so please don't yell back at me for making that observation. I think most people really do accept small talk, and sometimes that can often lead to a genuine feeling of being part of a human race. What a jump from here to the question of today's podcast. Can disparate Jews share non-political events? And I don't have in mind standing at a bus stop with a diverse group of Jews to see if the answer is yes. In mind is a much broader band of non-political events, and these have a defined objective. The Revival Project promotes non-political events and activities, as mentioned, to strengthen bonds between Jewish communities in the diaspora and Israel. So there really is a clear goal we're aiming towards. The example of people being in close proximity, such as sharing a designated space at a bus stop, a supermarket checkout counter, among such other public places, is usually of a transitory nature. In other words, they are not there for any purpose other than to suit their own personal needs. Whereas Revival Project events and activities are really specifically designed to provide a virtual space that both accommodates individual personal activities while adding a new dimension into the equation. This added entity focuses on Israel, almost as a standalone being that can attract the attention of these diverse group of Jews without having to include any individual prejudice against each other. Now, that probably sounds a little complicated, but let's try breaking it down into more simplified, bite-sized chunks. We'll take an example non-political event and activity to demonstrate what we have in mind. This sample event will be celebrating the existence of the Jewish diaspora. Yes, I repeat it, celebrating the existence of the Jewish diaspora. Now, if your feelings about the Jewish state of Israel are even remotely similar to my own, such an event just has to be a major challenge to come to terms with. Yes, it's a little bit like someone who's sent to prison saying, well, let's celebrate my being in prison. That can be the outlook from someone who's in Israel who thinks, well, how did you get in the diaspora? Is it such a desirable place to be? Let's hit the pause button on knee-jerk emotional responses and take a more objective look at this topic. If we are to have a real shot at strengthening bonds between Jewish communities in the diaspora and Israel, surely the starting point has to be recognizing that there is a difference between these two entities in the first place. If logic dictates that there is, then getting the ball rolling by denying the very existence or right to existence between these two communities is probably not the most recommended course of action to take. Therefore, coming to terms that either through design or circumstance Jews do live elsewhere to us, then extending a degree of warmth towards accepting their predicament is more likely to open dialogue than immediately cut one off. You recall in our first pilot episode, we discussed the situation of Jews living in a particular part of Israel, which renders them as being settlers And that has led to a lot of demonization based on geographical location of where Jews happen to live. I hope you're getting the drift by now. Returning to this event about celebrating life in the diaspora, those in Israel have extended recognition to their diaspora counterparts in a kindly manner that immediately helps to build bridges from which more solid foundations can now be built upon. We have now conjured up an event related to celebrating the existence of the Jewish diaspora. Next comes associated activities. What is an event, and also what is an activity connected with that event? Well, let's think of an event as something related to time and place. Now think of an activity as an action connected with that event. At this stage, I hope you have your thinking hat firmly in place. You're going to need it. Remember that the theme of the Revival Project is promoting non-political events and activities aimed at strengthening bonds between the diaspora and Israel. So, what of the focus of these events and activities? It has been clearly stated that the focus is on Israel's Diamond Jubilee, or as we have coined it, the Revival Anniversary Year. Revival, R for revival, A for anniversary year, and Y, together that spells the word ray. The appeal of calling it ray means that we can now also talk about the ray of hope, the Revival Anniversary Year. Having introduced the Jewish diaspora's existence into our sample event, it is now time to turn the spotlight on the birthday child, or seeing that we are all technically part of the children of Israel, maybe the birthday child isn't the best name, but saying a lot of greats before the word grandfather to arrive at the time of Jacob is something I prefer to pass on for the time being. Having shifted the focus from the existence of the diaspora to our shared forefather, whose name also represents the country of Israel, Jacob was also known as Israel, one can only hope that brain cells will start turning in the right direction. Further down the project line, when history of the diaspora is better understood, and then the strengthening of the bond should tighten around the inescapable conclusion, or the one true thing that holds us together in the first place, we can then put things into better perspective. I need to digress a little at this stage to ensure that the key message of the Revival Project is put into context. As previously mentioned, Jacob, whose name is also Israel, asked his children to gather around together, although he never got around to finishing his intended message about what would befall us at the end of the days. The very request to get together was the clear and concise starting point of his intended message. And that leads us to our own key message. We are getting it together. Let that sink in a little. Getting it together, almost as a response to Jacob's request to us. Back to the question of what activities are now appropriate for the sample event of celebrating the diaspora, keeping focus on Israel's revival year, that ray of hope, and finally our slogan of we are getting it together, the answer is not so hard as one might imagine. One suggested activity is providing an online scavenger hunt. That's like a fun treasure hunt, which gives clues as to how the diaspora got into being in the first place. Then we gently nudge the next activity towards Israel's miraculous revival. All that now leaves us is to put one and one together, and guess what we now get? We are really getting it together ourselves. There's no point in widening an already regrettable gap when we could find simple, fun-packed and friendly ways of getting the breach repaired. Words from the heart go to the heart, which is often a sentiment said by the great Jewish leader, the Rebbe, the Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson. He dedicated his righteous life to strengthening bonds between Jews. Regardless of our station in life, if we even feel any positive connection with the children of Israel, one should not be subject to harsh judgment. What do I mean by this? Well, this person's not fully Jewish, his mother's Jewish, his father's not Jewish, he's a goy. And look the way he davens, look the way he prays. It goes on. And it can be sometimes it can get very nasty. I'll tell you a story. I'm a certified licensed tour guide with the Israel Ministry of Tourism. And a few years back, I was taking a group of young adults. Actually, they were even younger than that. Some were from about 12 years old upwards on a trip around Israel. It was their first time. And there was one girl there I think she must have been about 12 years old. And she was so excited. Her plan was that she'd be in Masada, in the synagogue there, the ancient synagogue, and she'd have just a little ceremony just to celebrate her bat mitzvah. What was her situation? Well, her father was Jewish, her mother was not. And that really was of little consequence. I mean, she was loved by the group. She loved them. She loved being in Israel. She had such a kind heart, such a giving nature. So we were out there on the top. We did a normal climb up the snake path. And then we're at the top. We looked towards the synagogue to set up a little space for ourselves there, so she could do a little symbolic ceremony. Very sadly, a group of people came. They saw her. They understood what was going on, and they nosed towards us. And some of the behavior there was absolutely shocking. One of them was saying to her, "Look, you're not even Jewish. I don't know what you're doing." And it was all I could do to control my anger and to move them out of the picture. Thankfully, she had her ceremony and she enjoyed the rest of her trip. And the amazing thing is that in later years, she actually converted fully to Orthodox Judaism. What was that about? A human being? Okay, sure, look, and I've got to admit that, in fact, it's nothing to admit because I don't see if there's anything wrong, but I'm also an advocate of the fact that we have a halakha, we have a law, and there's certain principles involved with who is a Jew and who is not a Jew. But does that mean that we have the right to trample on people's emotions? If someone wants to connect with Israel, whatever way, and they've got a good heart, they don't have any malicious intent, let them. Why not? Sure, we can gently, and I mean gently, explain to them what are the circumstances involved with becoming Jewish, how one can be recognized. I think it's only fair to do that. But do we have to be so... There's no words to describe it, really. Good news is that there are many degrees of association with Israel. And this brings us to the very heart of what the Revival Project is about. And the reason why we talk about non-political events and activities to achieve our goal. In this instance, the association with Israel focuses on a birthday party, a 75th Diamond Jubilee anniversary, the Revival anniversary year. Yes, the children of Israel are back in the promised land. And we have our friends and relatives and family scattered throughout the diaspora, trying to create events and activities like I suggested. I'm hoping that you would have ideas. I mean, what could be more simple than children of Israel in this case, providing their own entertainment, events and activities for a birthday party? This is a Jewish revival. We are back again. And we are getting it together.